Hi, this is Teddy, and welcome to the 500th episode of Two Broads Talking Politics, hosted by Kelly and Sophy. Get your vaccine.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Two Broads Talking Politics. I am Sophie and I am here with my co-host Kelly. Hey Kelly.
Hi Sophie.
And today is, drumroll please, our 500th episode.
I can't believe it.
I know, that's what my husband just said. He asked who we were talking to today and I said, ourselves. And then he was amazed to discover that it was our 500th episode.
It's pretty unbelievable. But I looked back and it's been over 3.5 years since we started. We started in September 2017. So, it's been a good long time. It also doesn't feel that long.
I know, it doesn't seem like we could have had 500 episodes, but I guess we did.
Yeah. And so in those 3.5 years, we have spoken with, I don't know the number of guests, but it's well over 500 guests because there have been episodes with multiple guests in them. And nearly every episode, except the first one and this one, has had at least one guest.
And I remember a lot of our state-by-state episodes had a ton of guests in them. So
Yes. So in 2018, in the lead up to the 2018 election, we talked to at least one person who was on the ballot in November from all 50 states, which was impressive and difficult. I think the last state we got was like Delaware, mm-hmm. Hawaii. I don't know. There were a couple states where there weren't that many contested races, and it was a little harder to find people. But so in that time, in those 500 plus guests, and this includes the Vote Her In series that we have done with Rebecca Sive. We've spoken to, I believe, 5 U.S. senators, a ton of U.S. Congress people, at least a dozen, possibly more, 1 governor, Laura Kelly, 1 lieutenant governor, Juliana Stratton, 2 attorneys general, I think, Kwame Raoul in Illinois and Dana Nessel in Michigan.
Josh, didn't we talk to Josh Call?
Oh, yeah. And Josh Call. So many people that I have forgotten some of them. 1 cabinet member, Secretary Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, and she has been on multiple times. Mm-hmm. So, and then just, a ton of people who have run for and have won seats in state legislatures, city governments, school boards, all sorts of things like that. I feel like we've gotten a really good representative sampling of people in office around the country.
Totally.
So one thing I wanted to talk about today was just things have changed a lot in the U.S. since September 2017 in a whole lot of different ways. I just want to sort of talk a little bit about that, where we were then, where we are now, how we're feeling about politics. So I think the way I want to frame at least the beginning of this conversation is, are we more hopeful about politics now than we were in September 2017? Or were we more hopeful about politics then? So what do you think?
I feel like it's a complicated question.
Yes.
I think that my opinion, my belief in what we need to do has changed. Mm-hmm. My belief that we can do it is the same. So I think I'm as hopeful. I think I would say on balance, as hopeful as I was in 2017. I think I've seen a lot of things happen because of liberal and leftist grassroots action, I am thinking specifically right now of the ACA repeal, and how close we came to that whole thing being repealed. And then how the actions of a lot of ordinary people calling their senators and their representatives and, picketing and marching and things, how that actually did change the outcome. And yet there's still a lot of work to do. And at this point, 3 years on, I feel like we've sort of stepped back from the precipice, but we can still see it. It's still there. It's still ever present. And it's not going to be something that we can fix in necessarily another 3 years either. It's a long-term fight. It's a fight that's going to last my entire life. So that's tiring, but I do believe that we can move forward, that we can get it done. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's similar. I mean, in some ways, of course, things are so much better than they were 3.5 years ago. Just swapping out, having Biden now instead of Trump, having all of the Biden appointees in the cabinet instead of Trump's appointees, those things are incredible. I can't imagine we would have gotten to the point we are with COVID recovery if Trump and his team were still in place. And so that is wonderful. Of course, having the House, this is a 360 from where we were then, right? At that point, Republicans had the White House, they had the Senate, and they had the House. And now Democrats have all three, although the Senate's a little bit touch and go sometimes. But, I think all of that is obviously a sea change and is wonderful. I think, though, that I feel sometimes less hopeful than I did then. I mean, in some ways, it's because we had nowhere to go but up. Things were so bleak, so terrible, that anything seemed like a victory. Winning the House in 2018 was just amazing. It was this huge thing. And now we have to keep the House. And that's a totally different kind of fight. We're not the scrappy little resistors anymore. We are the people have to do the work, the maintenance of democracy. And so that's a little bit of a different feeling. I think I know so much more now about everything that can go wrong than I did then. That's a little bit disheartening sometimes. When we started this, I didn't know that much about redistricting, for instance. I didn't know all the ways that our democracy could be stolen and is regularly stolen. And so I'm glad that I know those things, and I'm glad that we are able to help people learn about those things. But it's also disheartening to know those. And I think, this idea that it felt then in September 2017 to me, and I'm sure a lot of people were further along in their political awakening already at that point, but to me at least, it felt like we just need to be in this fight hardcore until 2018, till the midterms. Okay, we won those. Now we just need to be in this fight until 2020. And at some point along the way, toward the end of 2019, I think, I started to realize, I realized intellectually, but it just started to kind of hit me that, oh, this is never over. You can't ever look away. The work just continues and continues and continues. And there are always going to be people on the other side who are not just disagreeing with us, but are trying to take democracy away, who are trying to take away the right to vote, who are trying to give advantages to people who already have advantages at the expense of people who are disadvantaged. And we can continue to fight that, and we do, and we should. It's just a really big weight, I think, to have on all the time.
Yeah, and I think the feeling when we were in the thick of it for the 2018 midterms, there was actually something, I mean, it was a terrifying time, but there was something exhilarating about knowing that, like, it was kind of the last shot, right? Like, there was almost a fatalistic, like, we got to get the House back or else, Trump is just going to destroy everything. And there was something kind of freeing about that, and that we could just sort of throw ourselves into the midterms and sort of not hold back at all, not leave any energy or time for ourselves. And now that we're sort of out of that mode and we have to be thinking longer term, I can't just throw, all my money and my energy and my time into the political arena anymore, because I have to be strategizing for how do I survive long term? So it's such a different feeling now. I feel less like I'm on the barricades, and I feel more like I am working in my garden or something, like toiling sort of for a longer term sort of deal.
Yeah. You absolutely hit the nail on the head. It's so much easier. And, we could talk about this with COVID too. It's so much easier to be in emergency response mode. It's so much easier in some ways to just be like, okay, I don't have to worry about anything else right now. If I work out, who cares? If my house is a disaster, it doesn't matter. If I'm ignoring my kids too much, okay, this has to get done. I'm going to buckle down and focus it, all of it, and finding balance in your life is a whole lot more difficult. Necessary, but difficult.
We haven't necessarily fixed any of the issues that make it hard to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to plan for the long term without having actually set up our society in a way that allows us to, be able to take a break from our kids, or be able to, take more rest if we need it.
Yes. Everybody go pass the American Families Act now, please.
Yes, please.
Like yesterday, very soon. So I think this is good to talk about and acknowledge, but I don't want to make it seem like everything is doom and gloom either, because I think there is a lot that is so good right now, and and so hopeful. So I do also want to talk some then about what are we just really happy about right now? What are the bright spots, and not just short term, but long term? I mean, of course, and it perhaps goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. The election of Kamala Harris as vice president is amazing, is wonderful, I can't even still now, however many months into it we are, I can't totally wrap my brain around it, that this thing that I have been wanting, yearning for since I was a little kid is finally true, that we have a woman who is vice president, who is a heartbeat away from the presidency, who seems to have a lot of influence in the Oval Office, is highly respected, and it's really wonderful in a way that I knew it would be, but it still just sort of really emotionally hit me. And so I don't ever want to be sort of forgetting how big, how momentous, and how important that is.
Yeah, I actually feel like my earlier comments kind of belie the fact that I do believe we are in a sort of a new progressive era.
Mm-hmm.
For most of my life, having been born in the 80s, in the mid 80s, I felt like we were living sort of in the conservative paradigm, right? Like the overtone window was such that assumptions were skewed conservative, and what was quote unquote reasonable or moderate was skewed conservative. And I feel like that continued until recently. And I do feel like this is a new era in which progressivism is flourishing, is growing, and is changing the conversation. Like, I don't feel that we are living in conservatives' world anymore. I feel like we're living in a world where liberal points of view, leftist points of view are taken more seriously and are more default. And I think that's due to a lot of really hard work by people on the left, by the Democratic Party. But I'm just really grateful that I get to sort of be part of it.
And it's due to the persistence of Elizabeth Warren.
Yes. That is my one. I have to say I would say there's three sort of exhausting factors to me that we've sort of run up against. And one of them was the constant abuses of the Trump administration. And one of them was COVID. And one of them was the exhaustion that was for me the 2020 presidential Democratic primary. Mm-hmm. And sort of having to relearn all the disheartening lessons about the way that society and the media treat women, specifically women of color.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. And, I think the one difference in 2020 as opposed to 2016, though, is it didn't take until after the fact for us to recognize it.
Mm-hmm, that's true.
In 2016, not that no one recognized the misogyny that was happening, but a lot of it was after Hillary Clinton lost, the media going, oh, right. Maybe we weren't fair in our coverage, maybe, et cetera, et cetera. And in 2020, it was being called out constantly, even in the midst of it happening. It didn't change what happened. I think that in a just world where we treated everyone equally, we would have seen Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris do a lot better in the primary. But it was at least called out. And so that gives me some hope that in 2024 and 2028, that will change somewhat, that it's moving. It's slower than I want, but it is faster than it could be.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think, and we've talked about this before, that while it's hard in this country to envision a woman president when you've never seen it, although now we see a woman vice president, so that makes it easier, we are seeing increasing numbers of women in Congress, in governorships, in state legislatures. We have state legislatures now that are majority women, not very many of them, but a few. And that does make a huge difference. I think that, that is one of the real pluses to me, one of the real bright spots of the past 3.5 years is seeing just this incredible number of women, and we're not at parity. We're not anywhere close to parity across the country in federal representation or in most state legislatures, but seeing so many more women step up and say, all right, if Donald Trump can be president, I can be a state legislator. And take that seriously. And I think that we will, in our lifetimes, see a point where, just like in higher ed, that you see more women undergraduates now than men, that there will be a time that's probably not that far off that you will see more women in Congress, in state legislatures, doing the work. And that will be really important in terms of getting legislation that is favorable to women and to families into place.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the things I've seen over the past 3 years is not only the increase in women running for and winning office, but just the increase in political participation among women I know. Mm. I feel like now, before in 2017, I was interested in politics, but I was one of the few people in sort of my larger circle who would admit to being interested in it. And now I feel like, calling your congressperson or donating to a political candidate or volunteering to do get out the vote efforts or to text bank or even just to work the polls is common now. Mm-hmm. Among my friends, and people are much more open talking about their political perspectives and what they want to see happen in the country, and are more engaged, in my experience, in discussing policy points. And so I think that's kind of part of what this progressive renaissance has brought, is that people are more engaged with the democratic process and with government. More people I know who their representative and their senator even are, and are more interested in the process of passing legislation than I think they were previously. So that's a really exciting thing for me, to see people that I know so much more engaged in the political process.
Yeah, I have definitely seen that too. And not just engaged in, sort of the big ways, the calling your legislator, but engaged even in things like not letting bullies take over on social media, and so I'll see, a Facebook post that one of my friends, their, crazy uncle is talking about guns or whatever, and everyone else coming to the side of gun sense legislation and not letting the bully take over the conversation, which is what happened so much in 2016. And I think it was easy as women to, and not just women, of course, but for a lot of women, the sort of default reaction was, I don't want to engage in this. Maybe I'll just be quiet. I'll join this secret Hillary Clinton Pantsuit Nation Facebook group over here, but not be loud about it. And so many more women now being very loud about their politics everywhere publicly. And that's, I think, really important. And I think we really see that in the younger generation. So I'm Gen X, you're millennial, Gen Z, they are all about being loud about politics. And it's really exciting.
It is really exciting.
So I think then the other thing I would like to talk about is just sort of where we see both this podcast going moving forward, but also just where we see the political fight going. So we've said 3.5 years ago, it was about, all hands on deck, emergency reaction. Now it's much more, what can we do that's sustainable? And what do we do? How do we make sure that we are doing this in a way that we can continue to move forward? We can take care of ourselves, not just us, but everyone. What are the ways that we think about politics in a way that we can really keep going?
I think one thing that is important now is focusing really hard, and we've always done this really from the beginning, but focusing our attentions on those local and state races. In 2017, we started this podcast kind of as a reaction against what was happening at the federal level, but the way that Republicans got all of the power that they had and the way that they are continuing to be able to shape public policy despite not having majorities in any of the bodies of government on a federal level and not being the majority of American voters is because they were able to build a strong bench through local and state elections. And focusing on those has really given them the grassroots power to then be able to affect change on a larger level. So for me, I think it's really important to be focusing on helping out build the backbench for the Democratic Party across the country on a local level. And I'm not just saying like in my local area in Madison, but really helping wherever I can on a local level across the country. So, trying to connect with groups that are raising the profile of progressives who are running in mayoral elections or in school board elections or whatever. Really trying to focus on, let's get those state legislatures. Let's try and run progressive judges in Supreme Court races. Thinking sort of long term now that we're not sort of panicking and trying to react against the Trump administration, trying to build a long-term progressive movement. That's going to require us to really try to build our power on the local and state level as well.
Yeah, and we've had on the podcast a couple times Amanda Littman, who's one of the founders of Run for Something. And if you are not already following what Run for Something is doing, it is precisely that. So Amanda is somehow 12 years younger than I am, which is mind-boggling to me, but has built this organization that is really all about getting progressives, young progressives, elected everywhere, all over the country. And she talks, until she's blue in the face about we have to be thinking about the bench. We have to be thinking about running these down ballot races, that it can't all be about, just every 4 years we go, oh yeah, there's a presidential election, but we have to be doing this work continuously. And that means getting into school board races and city council races and state legislatures. And it means really supporting people who are just getting into politics. And these elections are usually so much cheaper and, frankly, so much easier to win if you start early and if you support them.
And not just for people getting into the race as candidates either. I think it's really important for everybody to be really engaged at the level, to know exactly what the issues on your ballot are, to know exactly what the local, and don't just vote, down the ballot because there's the same person who always runs for mayor and nobody opposes them. Like, learn more about the issues in your community, donate money to local candidates, and really focus on making your local area and your state as progressive as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're right. We can continue to do that on this podcast. It's 2021, of course, is not actually a down year. There are plenty of elections happening, as there are all over the place everywhere in this country. But it is a year with fewer sort of high profile races other than the Virginia gubernatorial race. There are a lot of big races that everyone's thinking about. So this is the perfect time to be doing that education, to be thinking about what is going on in your own community, to get to know your state legislature, your alderman, your city council member, whatever it is. Get to know them now. Really talk to them. Start maybe going to some board meetings and things. It's become somewhat easier since a lot of these things are on Zoom now, and I would imagine will continue to be available on Zoom even after they move back in person. So this is the time to be doing that while you're catching your breath, while you're making sure that you are healthy, because 2022 is going to be all hands on deck emergency mode, at least toward November.
And if you're like me and you live in a place where there actually are no races, there are no elections until 2022, then you can get involved in other people's local elections. I'm sure we'll be featuring on the podcast many people running for local and state office. I'm planning to sort of adopt a state based on some of our guests on the podcast, and try and make some phone calls and texts and donate money and, really maybe even get there out and volunteer in another state. Hopefully once more people are vaccinated and it can really be a good opportunity to get involved on a local level outside of your particular local level.
And on that note, we want to hear from all of you. So, we'll occasionally get emails or tweets or things, people saying, oh, this is probably too, small a race for you guys to cover. It's not. I guarantee you there is nothing too small. There are limits on our time. We can't do everything, but we want to know about everything. And, we have talked to really amazing guests before who are running way down the ballot, but it's so important.
And you never know where one of your guests is going to end up. We talked to a guest in 2018 who was running for a statewide race in Wisconsin, and she didn't win that race, but now she has won my state Senate race and she's my state senator. So you never really know where candidates are going to end up, even if they don't run that particular or win that particular race. You could be learning about an up and coming star who will be prominently featured in another race in the future.
Yes. And Melanie Stansbury was on the podcast back in 2018, was running for a state House seat in New Mexico, which she won, and is now running for Congress to take Deb Haaland's place. So yeah, lots of times these people, you got to start somewhere, right? And so lots of times people do start at the local level and then they keep moving up and are really important to get to know. All right. Well, I think we have covered a lot of ground in the past 500 episodes and in the past half hour. Are there other topics, things that we should talk about as we mark this momentous occasion?
I don't think so, but I'd love to hear from our listeners what else they would like to have us talk about in future episodes.
Yes, absolutely. We love hearing from people. So twobroadstalkingpolitics.com. You can email us, twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. I haven't really gotten the hang of Instagram messages, though, so don't message us there. Or do, but just be aware it might take us 30 days to reply. But otherwise, we're happy to hear from people always. I will note that I am launching another podcast starting in June, which is going to be a just limited run seasons, so probably 8 or 10 episodes per season, on history and historic events and people that you maybe haven't heard that much about or that you learned the wrong story about. So I've got a couple of guests lined up for that. It will launch in the beginning of June. But we'll keep going with Two Broads Talking Politics because politics doesn't end.
It never does.
Never does. Well, Sophie, it has been a true joy, and I think probably the very best thing about launching this podcast is that it brought us closer together.
Yeah, I agree.
And it has been great. I know a lot of people, the whole world shifted when COVID happened, and it's true, of course, for us as well. But the podcast didn't really change at all.
No.
We were able to just keep doing what we do. We had always been talking to people virtually because we talk to people all over the country. And that has been great. Although I am looking forward to getting to political events in person again. In 2019, I took like 100 selfies with political people and then got to do almost none of it in 2020.
Well, it's coming.
It's coming. All right. Well, on that note, get your vaccine, everyone, and stay safe. And hopefully we will see you all in person and have a big group hug very soon.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.